7 powerful medieval weapons that characterized the siege war. Medieval warfare revolved around the sieges of castles and cities. In this video, we explore the terrifying medieval weapons that besiegers used to breach the walls of fortifications. Medieval warfare was carried out mainly as a series of attacks. The taking of castles was the key to the conquest of a region or territory because it represented the seat of local economic and political power. The garrison of the castillos could mitigate the lines of supply of an advancing army if they went too far, which is why the attackers became the standard method through which the medieval war was carried out. However, attacking and capturing a castle was not an easy task. It involved powerful defensive fortifications meticulously designed to resist the attack. As a result, the besieging medieval armies resorted to a variety of harassment machines to give them an advantage. We will now see the list of 7 medieval weapons used during siege wars. Number 1. Ram, ancient invention used in medieval warfare. The battering ram is a very simple siege weapon designed to break open the gates or walls of a fortification by repeated blunt blows. Rams usually consisted of a large log, which would be thrown against a gate or wall with a large amount of force, either by a team of people holding the log and physically swinging it, or else being suspended from a structure by chains or ropes, from which it would be pulled back and released to swing forward. To better protect the soldiers operating the ram from the defenders' missiles, the structure on which the ram was mounted was covered. Often this, usually wooden, canopy was also covered with damp animal skins to make it fire-resistant. Rams could also be capped, where the end would be fitted with a block of iron or steel sometimes shaped into the head of an animal, in order to make them more effective during medieval warfare. Rams were popular because they were extremely quick and easy to build, as well as being very powerful medieval weapons. When thrown against wooden gates or stone walls, which were particularly prone to splintering or breaking, they could create cracks and eventually holes with repeated blows, allowing besiegers to enter the fortification. This siege weapon has very ancient origins. The oldest depiction is believed to be from 11th century before Christ Egypt, where engravings on a tomb show soldiers advancing towards a fortress under a covered structure carrying a long stick. During the Iron Age, battering rams were used in the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Assyrian engravings demonstrate how large and advanced these siege engines became by the 9th century before Christ, with battering rams being covered in wet skins. Historical sources also attest to the use of battering rams by the ancient Greeks and Romans, who first employed them in wars against the Gauls. The Roman writer Vitruvius mentions an innovation used by Alexander the Great, whereby the ram was supported by rollers rather than ropes or chains. These rolls would allow the ram to gain more speed, hitting its target harder and causing greater damage. Battering rams remained popular as medieval weapons and were used in some of the most important sieges of the time, including during the Crusades and during several sieges of Constantinople. Number 2. Siege towers, mobile protection. Siege towers were designed to carry besieging soldiers and ladders close to the walls of a fortification while protecting them from enemy bow and crossbow fire. Typically, the tower would be rectangular in shape and was built to match the height of the walls it faced. Internally, the siege tower would be equipped with stairs and a series of platforms elevating the structure on which soldiers could stand. The top of the siege tower was usually crowned by another open-air platform. Typically archers or crossbowmen would stand on this upper platform and fire at the defenders as the tower approached the walls. These medieval weapons were mounted on wheels so they could be pushed into walls. Much like the battering ram, the wooden sides of the siege tower were susceptible to fire and were therefore often covered with wet animal skins. During an assault, the siege tower would be rolled up to the walls while the soldiers inside took cover from enemy missile fire. Once it reached the walls, a plank would be thrown between it and the wall either from the upper platform or from internal platforms, allowing attackers access to the curtain walls of a fortification. Thanks to their enormous size and weight, siege towers were very slow and were often the target of the garrison's artillery fire. They were typically built on site during the siege, and some were built to contain internal battering rams as well. Siege towers were also vulnerable to earthworks such as ditches, and would need teams of men to prepare the way for them during an assault by filling in these ditches. Like battering rams, siege towers also have ancient origins and were widely used by the Egyptians, Romans, Assyrians, and Chinese. They were commonly used as medieval weapons, and their designs became increasingly larger and complex. At the siege of Kenilworth Castle, a tower that could house 200 archers was built. However, the invention of gunpowder artillery made siege towers obsolete, as cannons were much more effective at destroying the curtain walls of a fortification. Because these cannons could destroy walls with relative ease, turrets were no longer needed to transport troops over curtain walls. Number 3. Ballista, Great Missile Launcher. The ballista was an ancient siege weapon that was mainly used to fire large arrows or javelin arrows, but it could also be used to throw stones against the walls of fortifications. A ballista was similar in appearance to a very large crossbow, but instead of using a horizontal bow maintained at low tension, it used sables with torsion resorts. Torsion is the torsion of an object through torsion. The ballista torsion resorts were filled with several twisted pegs, coiled hairs or cords, generally cotton balls. Wooden stilts were inserted into the resorts and the corner of the ballista arch would join the ends of these stilts. When you get out of the corner, the resorts are kept under tension. When they fired, the resorts released a large amount of energy, firing any projectile with which the weapon was loaded. The ballista developed like a Greek invention, and it is known that Alejandro Magno and his priest Felipe II employed it much. The Romans also adopted it and used it extensively throughout their history. In particular, they added capstans and metallic components to their ballistas so that they could support greater tension and, therefore, make them more powerful. Thanks to its relatively simple design, the ballista can be modified to fire arrows and large stones, which makes it useful in a harassment scenario. The most powerful weapons could fire projectiles up to 1,000 meters, although the effective range was probably much smaller. Thanks to its small size, it could also be mounted on siege towers. Ballistas were certainly used as medieval weapons, although as resources became scarce they were used less, becoming obsolete with the invention of the spring and the catapult. However, the ballista's engineering concepts survived in the ballistic ballista of the 12th century, which used a capstan and steel elements to create greater tension. Number 4. Springald, Screws and Greek Fire. The springald was a medieval weapon very similar in function to a ballista, except it was built around a rectangular frame, with inward swinging arms. Like the ballista, it used twisted skeins to actuate two levers or bow arms that pivoted into the springald's wooden frame. It could fire large bolts, often with metal tips, as well as stones. Greek fire was also known to have been fired from springalds by the Byzantines. There is very little archaeological evidence for springalds, although they are attested to have been used throughout Western Europe in written sources during the 12th and 13th centuries. Leonardo da Vinci also designed a springald. Several working replicas were built, including an 8-foot-long example that was capable of launching a bolt weighing 5.5 pounds 180 feet. Number 5. Catapult, Simple Projectile Launcher. The catapult was a very popular harassment machine throughout the ancient world and continued to be used as a medieval weapon before being replaced by the catapult. A functional catapult releasing stored potential energy to launch a projectile, more commonly a stone or rock. The catapults can also fire projectiles in flames and even decomposed animal corpses, which can be used to spread illnesses and lower the morale of a besieged city. Catapults, also known as onagers, were generally built around a flat rectangular structure close to the ground, to which a vertical structure was attached. Where the two landmarks come together, a twisted haze of tail is found and a palanca or arm passes through the tail. When the tail is pulled down, generally using a capstan or windlass, the tails twist even more and remain low in tension. A missile was placed in a cube placed at the end of the arm, and when the weapon was fired, the tension was suddenly released, propelling the arm and the missile up and down. The catapults were relatively simple pieces of machinery, but they were effective in launching large stones and could be very useful in a disaster. They were developed for the first time by Greeks and were widely used by both Greeks and Romans throughout antiquity. However, they were used as medieval weapons, although, in the 9th and X centuries, the catapults were largely replaced by much more powerful trebuchets. The classic catapult could not hope to cross the stone walls that were increasingly used in the castles of northern Europe. Number 6. Mangonel, traction trebuchet, a more effective launcher. Also known as traction trebuchet, the mangonel was a type of traction trebuchet that emerged in China and arrived in Europe in the 6th century, having been taken there by Avar nomads. The mangonel differed from previous siege weapons in that it did not operate using torsion, instead it used manpower to project missiles, taking advantage of the mechanical advantage of a lever. A mangonel was essentially a large vertical structure with a large lever or arm attached to its apex. The arm swung vertically and was moved by men pulling ropes attached to one end. At the other end of the arm, a sling was attached into which a missile was placed. When a team of men pulled on one end of the arm, it rotated in the frame, swinging the sling and missile up and forward. The slingshot would then launch the missile at the top of its arc. This siege mechanism had distinct advantages over the catapult in that it was less complex and easier to construct. It was also quicker to reload, so a constant rate of fire could be maintained to hit the curtain walls of a fortification during medieval warfare. Thanks to its simplicity and effectiveness, the mangonel remained the preeminent siege weapon in Western Europe until the advent of the counterweight trebuchet. Number 7. Counterweight trebuchet, utilizing the mechanical advantage in a medieval weapon. The counterweight trebuchet was very similar in design to a mangonel or draw trebuchet, except that it employed a counterweight to swing the gun arm using gravity, making it much more powerful. Counterweight trebuchets were typically large, measuring around 10 to 30 meters tall. They were made so high so that the gun arm could rotate in a wide arc, often over 180 degrees. In order to increase the mechanical advantage of the counterweight trebuchet, the side of the arm that held the projectile was typically between 4 and 6 times longer than the side that held the counterweight. The enormous reconstruction trebuchet in operation at Warwick Castle in England, the largest in the world, is 18 meters high and is capable of launching a 36-kilogram missile up to 300 meters. The power of a counterweight trebuchet lies in the use of gravity and counterweight to project the missile. Potential energy is stored by lifting a very heavy box, typically filled with rocks, attached to the shorter end of the trebuchet arm, usually through the use of winches or winches. When fired, the counterweight drops and the arm rotates rapidly through its arc gains speed. The missile is released from its sling at the top of the arc. As with mangonels, stones, debris, decaying carcasses and even incendiary ammunition were fired from counterweight trebuchets during medieval warfare. These formidable siege engines were developed in the late 12th century and were widely used in Europe and the Middle East. It is undoubtedly in reaction to the power of the new counterbalancing trebuchets that concentric castles were developed in the Crusader states of the Levant. Despite their complexity and slow reload times, counterweight trebuchets were unparalleled siege weapons until the late medieval period, when they were replaced by increasingly effective artillery. So, what did you think of today's video? Did you already know any of these siege weapons used in the Middle Ages? Which impressed you the most? Let us know your thoughts on this topic, as we would love to respond to your comments below. And if you liked this video and haven't subscribed to our channel yet, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss any of the intriguing videos we post every week. And if you want to take advantage and learn a little more, be sure to click on one of these videos that we are suggesting for you. Until the next video.